The chandelier light was too bright. Elena Moketivos could feel it on her skin like a spotlight, the kind that finds every flaw and holds it there for the world to see. She tugged at the sleeve of her dark green dress, wishing for the 100th time that she had stayed home. The ballroom buzzed with soft music and louder gossip. Crystal glasses clinked. Diamonds caught the light. And in the middle of it all stood Marco Reyes, tall and polished, laughing with a circle of people who hung on his every word. Elena had loved him once. She had given him 3 years of her life. Now he looked at her like she was something he'd accidentally tracked in on his shoe. "Elena," Marco said, loud enough for the people near him to hear. "Still wearing things that hide you, I see." A few people laughed. Soft, cruel little laughs. "Some of us," he went on, swirling his champagne, "know when to let things go. Diets. Relationships. Dignity." His eyes moved over her body, slow and mocking. "You used to be pretty, you know. Before." Heat rushed up Elena's neck. Her hand shook around her small clutch purse. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut him the way his words cut her. But nothing came. Just silence, and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She turned and walked away as fast as her heels would let her, past the smirking faces, out through the side doors, into the cold night air of the parking garage. The garage was dark and nearly empty. Only a few cars dotted the rows beneath flickering yellow lights. Elena leaned against a concrete pillar and let the tears come, quiet and hot, down her cheeks. That's when she heard it. A low voice, calm but cold as steel, coming from the shadows a few rows away. "You won't say anything to anyone. You understand me?" Elena froze. A man's silhouette stood near a black car, and another man knelt in front of him, head down, shoulders shaking. The standing man's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in it that made the hair on Elena's arms stand up, a quiet promise that something very bad would happen if he wasn't obeyed. The kneeling man nodded fast, scrambled to his feet, and ran. The standing man turned, and Elena's breath caught. He was the kind of handsome that looked dangerous. Sharp jaw. Dark hair. A black suit that fit him like it had been built around his body. And his eyes, when they landed on her, were the coldest, sharpest blue she had ever seen. This was Dante Castellano. Her neighbor. The quiet, expensive man from the penthouse across the hall who said maybe 10 words to her in 8 months. He saw her tear-streaked face. He saw her shaking hands. And then he saw the blood on his own knuckles, and something flickered behind his eyes, something almost like surprise at being caught. "You're hurt," he said. Not a question. His voice was different now, lower, careful. "I'm fine," Elena whispered, stepping back. Dante didn't move closer. He simply watched her, the way a predator watches something it hasn't decided whether to protect or ignore. "Someone make you cry tonight?" Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here she was, standing in a dark garage with a man who had clearly just hurt someone, and he was asking who made her cry. "It doesn't matter," she said. "It does to me," Dante said quietly, and for a moment his eyes held hers like he actually meant it. Before she could respond, he stepped back, nodded once, and walked into the night without another word, leaving her alone with her racing heart and a strange, unfamiliar warmth pushing through her chest. She got a cab home 20 minutes later, replacing the memory of Marco's cruel smile with the memory of cold blue eyes that had actually seen her. But as her cab pulled up to her building, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. A black SUV sat parked across the street, engine running, headlights off. Still. Watching. Elena told herself it was nothing. Just a car. Just paranoia after a bad night. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, locked the door behind her, and peeked through the blinds one last time. The SUV hadn't moved. And inside it, a man slowly raised a phone toward her window, and took a picture. The next morning, Elena told herself she'd imagined it. The SUV. The camera. All of it. She made her coffee, opened her small flower and pastry shop the way she always did, and tried to push the strange night out of her mind. But across the hall, Dante Castellano hadn't forgotten anything. He sat in his dark office with 3 monitors glowing in front of him, watching footage from the cameras hidden around his own building, cameras most people didn't know existed. He rewound the feed from the night before, watching the black SUV park, watching the man inside lift his phone toward Elena's window. That wasn't random. That was surveillance. Professional. Patient. Dante's jaw tightened. He typed Elena's full name into a search system few people had access to, the kind that pulled from federal databases, sealed records, things that weren't supposed to be searchable at all. The screen froze. Then a single red message blinked across it, ***, record restricted, flag. ***. Dante leaned back slowly. In his world, that kind of flag meant only one thing. Someone powerful had buried this woman's past on purpose. He thought of her crying in the parking garage. Soft eyes. Trembling hands. Ordinary, he had assumed. Just his quiet neighbor who baked things and grew flowers. He was wrong. And Dante Castellano did not like being wrong. He made a decision then, simple and absolute, he would get closer. Not to investigate her, though that mattered too, but because some old, buried instinct in his chest had stirred the moment he saw fear in her eyes, and he didn't plan on ignoring it. Elena, meanwhile, had made a decision of her own. She stood in her small bedroom that evening, staring at a deep emerald velvet dress hanging on her closet door. She had bought it on a whim weeks ago and never worn it, too afraid of stairs, too used to hiding inside soft, shapeless sweaters. Tonight was her shop's reopening celebration. Friends, neighbors, a few loyal customers. Small, but important to her. And after last night, after Marco's cruel words echoing in her head all day, something in her had quietly snapped. She was done hiding. She slipped the dress on. It hugged every curve she usually tried to cover, the deep green fabric rich and soft against her skin. She let her dark hair fall loose instead of pulling it back. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, not because she looked different, but because for the first time in years, she looked proud star. The celebration was warm and simple, string lights glowing above the small courtyard behind her shop. Laughter, soft music, the smell of fresh bread and roses. Elena moved through it with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. Then she saw him. Dante stood near the entrance, dressed in black as always, looking completely out of place among the fairy lights and flower pots, and completely impossible to ignore. His eyes found her instantly, and this time, he didn't look away. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time, the green velvet, the warmth in her cheeks, the woman beneath the cardigans he had never noticed before. "You clean up well, neighbor," he said quietly when he reached her. "I didn't know you came to flower shop parties," Elena replied, surprised by her own boldness. "I don't," Dante said. "I came for you." The words hung in the air between them, simple but heavy. Elena's heart skipped, unsure what to do with the warmth spreading through her chest. They talked for an hour, the conversation easy in a way she hadn't expected from someone so cold and controlled. When the party wound down, Dante offered to walk her home, and she didn't refuse. The night was quiet, street lights humming above empty sidewalks. Elena laughed softly at something he said, a rare, real laugh, when a tiny red dot suddenly appeared on her collarbone, small and silent. Dante saw it a half-second before she did. "Down," he shouted, slamming into her, both of them crashing to the pavement just as glass exploded from the shop window beside them. A gunshot echoed through the street. Elena lay frozen beneath him, heart hammering, glass scattered around them like broken stars, and Dante's eyes, sharp and furious, scanning the rooftops for whoever had just tried to kill her. Dante didn't wait for the police. By the time the sirens were still 2 streets away, he had already pulled Elena off the cold pavement, wrapped his jacket around her trembling shoulders, and guided her into a black car waiting at the curb. "You're safe," he said, his voice quiet but absolute, like a fact rather than a comfort. "You're not going back to your apartment tonight." Elena was too shaken to argue. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Someone had just shot at her. Real bullets, real glass, real fear crawling under her skin. Dante's penthouse was nothing like she expected. Dark wood, soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows looking over the city. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress, which, she would soon learn, was exactly what it was. "Stay here," Dante said. "Until I understand what's happening, you don't leave my sight." "This is insane," Elena whispered. "Why would anyone want to hurt me? I'm nobody." Something flickered behind Dante's eyes. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat across from her, his voice low and careful. "What do you remember about your parents?" The question caught her off guard. "My father died when I was 20. Business problems," they said. "We lost everything. I changed my name, moved here, started over." "Why does that matter?" "Because your name was flagged in a federal database," Dante said. "Restricted. Buried. People don't bury ordinary names, Elena." Over the next 2 days, Dante's people worked quietly in the background, digging through old financial records, court filings, anything connected to the Mocchetti name. Elena stayed close to him, unable to fully process the strange safety she felt in his presence, a man who was clearly dangerous, and yet made her feel more protected than she'd ever felt in her life. The truth came together slowly, then all at once. Elena wasn't just an ordinary woman who had lost her family's money. She was the last living heir of the Mocchetti banking fortune, a fortune that had quietly vanished years ago under business losses that were, in truth, carefully planned theft. Someone had drained the accounts, forged her father's signature on dozens of transfers, and pushed the family into ruin before her father's sudden death. And the name behind the company that had absorbed most of those stolen funds was one Elena knew far too well. Reyes Capital Group. Marco's company. "He didn't just leave me," Elena said quietly, staring at the documents spread across Dante's desk. "He destroyed my family first." Dante's expression turned to stone. "And now an audit is threatening to expose where that money really came from. Which means you're not just an inconvenient ex anymore, Elena. You're a witness. A loose end he never finished cleaning up." The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. Marco hadn't humiliated her at the gala out of cruelty alone, he'd been testing whether she still remembered anything, whether she still posed a threat. And when she didn't immediately react the way he expected, he decided to remove the risk entirely. Dante didn't waste time. Within hours, he had men quietly freezing Reyes Capital's smaller offshore accounts, calling in favors from contacts inside banks, turning Marco's own board members against him one whispered conversation at a time. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was precise, patient, and utterly merciless, exactly how Dante did everything. Late that night, while Elena slept in the guest room down the hall, Dante sat alone reviewing intercepted files his men had pulled from Marco's private servers. Photos. Documents. Surveillance reports going back months. Then one photo stopped him cold. It was Elena, standing outside her apartment building 8 months ago, the exact week Dante had moved into the penthouse across the hall from her. A note was attached to the file in Marco's own handwriting, *, position her near the asset. Watch what she does. *. Dante's blood ran cold. He hadn't found her by accident. He hadn't simply happened to live next door. Marco had placed her there. Deliberately. As bait, as a pawn, as a piece on a board Dante hadn't even known he was playing on. And Dante Castellano did not appreciate being used as anyone's pawn. Marco Reyes arrived at the private dining room exactly on time, dressed in his finest suit, confidence wrapped around him like armor. Dante Castellano had requested a peace dinner, a chance, his message said, to discuss their mutual interests. Marco assumed that meant negotiation. Maybe even an apology disguised as business. He was wrong. The room was elegant, candlelit, far too quiet. And at the head of the long table sat Elena, dressed in deep ruby red, her spine straight, her eyes calm in a way Marco had never seen before. 2 of Dante's men stood near the walls, silent and still. "What is this?" Marco asked, his smile faltering. Sit down, Dante said simply, gesturing to the empty chair across from Elena. Marco sat, though his confidence had already begun to crack. Elena slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the forged transfer documents, the buried account records, every piece of evidence connecting Reyes Capital to the theft of her family's fortune. You should have destroyed these better, Elena said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. Not anymore. Marco's face went pale. Elena, I can explain. You forged my father's signature, she continued, drained his accounts, watched our family fall apart, and then married into society like none of it happened. And when I became inconvenient again, you sent men to follow me. To kill me. That's insane, Marco said, though sweat had already started at his temple. Dante leaned forward, his voice dropping into that low, lethal tone Elena had heard once before in the parking garage. Check your phone, Marco. Confused, Marco pulled out his phone, and watched, live, as his primary business accounts froze one by one, the banking apps refreshing with red error messages. His face drained of color. Your mistress already signed paperwork against you this afternoon, Dante added calmly. Quite generous severance package, considering what she knew. And your bodyguards, Elena said, nodding toward the men standing silently by the walls, have been Dante's men since you walked through that door. Marco shot up from his chair, panic finally breaking through his composure. You don't understand who you're dealing with. No, Dante said, standing slowly, every movement deliberate. You don't understand who you've been dealing with. Two men stepped forward and escorted Marco from the dining room, his protests echoing down the hallway, into a smaller, windowless room at the back of the building. Elena didn't follow. She didn't need to see what came next, she only needed to know it would happen. Inside that room, Dante's voice dropped to something almost gentle, almost a whisper, the kind reserved only for moments that mattered most to him. You took everything from her. Her family. Her safety. Her sense of worth. He picked up a heavy iron tool resting against the wall, turning it slowly in his hand. I'm simply returning the favor, piece by piece. Marco's screams echoed faintly through the building's thick walls, brief and sharp, followed by silence. When Dante returned to the dining room 20 minutes later, his sleeves rolled down, his expression unreadable, Elena looked up at him with something between fear and relief tangled in her chest. Is it done? She asked quietly. For tonight, Dante said. But before they could leave, one of Dante's men rushed in, phone in hand, face tense. Sir, we have a problem. Reyes is saying he has insurance. A recording. Something that could expose the entire syndicate if it goes public. Dante's expression didn't change. If anything, the corner of his mouth lifted, slow and dangerous, like a man who already knew the ending to a story everyone else was still reading. Let him talk, Dante said quietly. That recording was never his leverage. Elena frowned, confused. What do you mean? Dante's cold blue eyes met hers, calm and certain. Because I made it. The recording played out exactly as Dante intended. By morning, news channels across the city were running the story on repeat. Marco Reyes, rising financial star, caught on tape admitting to forging documents, draining a dead man's accounts, and ordering the surveillance of an innocent woman. Federal agents arrived at his offices before sunrise, cameras flashing as he was led out in handcuffs, his expensive suit no longer able to hide what he truly was. His company collapsed within hours. Business partners pulled out. His name became something whispered with disgust instead of admiration. Whatever happened to him quietly behind closed doors after that, among the kind of men Dante answered to, never made the news at all. Some things, Dante told Elena, were better left as private warnings rather than public stories. Elena watched it all unfold from the safety of Dante's penthouse, a strange mix of relief and disbelief settling over her. The man who had haunted her nightmares, who had stolen her family's legacy and tried to erase her from existence, was gone. Truly gone. But more than that, she was free. With the forged documents exposed and the original Marchetti accounts finally traced and recovered, Elena reclaimed what had been stolen from her family years ago. Lawyers worked through the paperwork over the following weeks, restoring her name, her inheritance, her rightful place on the board her father had once led. She didn't recognize her own life anymore. And for the first time, that felt like a good thing. Dante stayed close through all of it, not out of obligation, but because something between them had shifted into something neither of them wanted to walk away from. Quiet dinners turned into quiet mornings. Careful conversations turned into easy laughter. The cold, controlled man the world feared had become, in private, achingly gentle with her, pulling blankets over her shoulders when she fell asleep on the couch, memorizing the way she liked her coffee, watching her with a kind of reverence she still wasn't fully used to. "You don't have to hide anymore," he told her one evening, his fingers tracing slow circles against her hand. "Not your name. Not your money. Not this." His eyes dropped briefly to the soft curve of her waist, the body she had spent years trying to shrink herself out of. "Especially not this." Elena felt her cheeks warm, but for once, it wasn't shame. It was something closer to pride. Weeks later, the city's biggest charity gala returned, the very same event where Marco had humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. This time, Elena walked in differently. She wore the same shade of deep emerald velvet from that first reopening night, the fabric hugging every curve she no longer apologized for. Her hair fell loose over her shoulders. Her chin stayed lifted. And on her arm, dressed in sharp black, stood Dante Castellano, a man the entire room feared and respected in equal measure. Heads turned. Whispers spread. The same people who had laughed at her months ago now watched in stunned silence as Dante guided her through the crowd like she was the only person in the room worth seeing. "Elena Marchetti," someone murmured near the bar, using her real name for the first time in years. "I had no idea." Dante leaned down close to her ear, his voice low and warm, meant only for her. "Let them stare," he said. "They are finally seeing what I saw from the very beginning." Elena smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and for the first time in her life, she didn't shrink away from the attention. She stood in it, claimed it, owned every inch of the space around her. The girl who once hid in oversized cardigans, who once apologized for the body she lived in, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived betrayal, reclaimed her name, and found a love fierce enough to burn down anyone who dared threaten her again. And as the music swelled and Dante pulled her close beneath the chandelier lights, Elena finally understood, she had never needed to shrink herself to be worthy of being seen. She had only needed someone willing to look. If you made it this far, drop a comment below. Would you forgive Marco, or did he deserve everything that came his way? Write down pointing backhand index, and if you loved this story, hit subscribe. The next dark romance is even more brutal.